Continue? Okay.
Yeah.
December 10, Wednesday. We heard news of 28 enemy planes over Manila. Catherine and I stayed at home, but Mother went to school. All government employees are ordered to report at their respective posts, so Mother had to go every day. A rumor has spread that Japanese submarines had landed on Karkar near Cebu, and people believed it, but it wasn't true. The postmen have double work. Now, rush telegrams come in all the time. We received one from my dad. Better come here, safer than Cebu. It read, a telegram from Malabang usually takes a few hours to reach us. This one took 2 days. Everyone is building a shelter in his front yard, a big hole in the ground, lined with sand and logs and sandbags. The man we hired to dig our shelter ran away to the mountains before the shelter was completed, so the pile of earth just adds to the depletedness of the yard. Cars are not allowed to blow their horns. Only Army or USAFI, United States Armed Forces of the Far East trucks have their privileges. So the garbage truck announced its appearance by the clanging of a bell. Ding, ding, ding. There goes the garbage truck. Next day, December 11, we heard news that Lieutenant Major Salas was killed, and fighting is going on in northern Luzon. On that day, Thursday, we packed all day. Into the big trunk went Mother's best linens, jewelry, pictures, silverware, china, pinyon, silks, stamps, and antiques. Mother sorted out her most valuable papers, such as our passports. The house is in a terrible mess, and I haven't practiced piano for days. I posted a picture of Santo Niño as the Holy Child upon the doorway to protect our house from fire during raids. I doubt it. In the 18th century, when Cebu burned down, the only house that was saved was the one that contained the Santo Niño statue. Tonight, Mother and I were out on the porch when I saw a great light suddenly flare up in the direction of the cadre. A few minutes later, fire engines roared up the street towards the airport. Nobody knew what it was till next morning. And this is what caused that. Major Salas attempted to take off in an observation plane to patrol the city, but the plane struck a bamboo clump and crashed and burned. Major Salas was then thrown clear of the plane, but died a few minutes later of concussion. He was the chief officer of the airport. Okay? There was a rumor in Manila that the water was poisoned. Many Japanese, mostly those of the wealthy class, have escaped from the city and have hidden in Guadalupe, Cebu. A Japanese was found disguised as a priest. The taxi companies reported having taken many Japanese to the hills, not knowing at the time that war had been declared.
Jane?
Right.
Maybe give us a little connection between...
Where we went to Landon Heights and the children were given their presents.
Right.
And
so explain that you're still in Cebu. You say we're still in Cebu.
Okay. Okay. December 25, Christmas, Thursday. People in Cebu ordered to evacuate. The joy of seeing the Johnson children opening their presents was as good as any present I would like to have for myself. After breakfast, we went to Landon Heights to visit the rest of us, Americans, who are staying up there. I played jacks with the children and saw their presents. We came down to Johnson's home just in time for lunch. And what a lunch. We had turkey. Up on Landon Heights, I learned that the three laborers were killed in the raid 3 days ago when the Japanese bombed the oil and gasoline tanks on Mactan Island. The laborers were ordered to take shelter under the coconut trees away from the tanks. Three men disobeyed and rushed out into the open in an effort to get to the barrio or town to see after the safety of their wives and children. A bomb fell and exploded near them, killing them instantly. One man had his face blown off, another was cut in half. I visited the Chew, children, and we hiked to the top of a high hill at Christmas, ate Christmas candy, and talked. Rosario, that's a friend of mine, showed me a molded copper pitcher that was at least 300 years old. I told her about my Chinese vase that my dad had found in a Moro house. The vase is an antique. This afternoon, word came that all Americans must be out of Cebu and in Bogo by 3 o'clock afternoon. The next day, and by 3 o'clock, the next day, we stayed up late at night, packing for the evacuation. Mother said, do everything the Japanese tell you to do except betray your country. Okay? Christmas 1941. No, we didn't have the joy of the season. There was the tenseness in the atmosphere. There was the homesickness as we listened to the carols. There was a sorrow for the soldiers fighting at the front. There was the thought of disappointed inhabitants of war-torn countries. All the peace and happiness was gone. It was a Christmas we will never forget, but one we will never wish to look back on. Peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Et entera paz. December 26, we got up before dawn and packed in the cold night air. As soon as it was light enough to see the road, we then started down. Looking down upon the city for the last time from the hill, I realized how much I love Cebu. It is my birthplace and home. I hate to remember this. We threw our clothes and canned goods into old copra sacks and packed them in Johnson's truck. Mother, Mrs. Johnson, and the two little girls rode in the car while Mrs. Johnson, Catherine, and I traveled in the truck. We had to go through 3 gasoline stations before we could get any gas for the truck. The first station refused to sell us any because we had no permit from the Army. The second station ran out of gas. It was rationed, but at the third station we filled her up. On the ride from Cebu to Medellin, we saw hundreds of Filipinos evacuating, trucks piled high with crates and baskets, tartanillas carrying 6 people. I pitied the poor horses, and scores of people in wagons, on caravels, or just walking, were fleeing the city. The most precious belongings seemed to be the inevitable sewing machine and fighting cock. The roads were smooth most of the way. We traveled along the seashore with the ocean always in view, and Cebu's ridge of low mountains in the other side of us. Arriving at Medellin, we expected to see a dusty sugar mill and rows of bodegas. Along the shore, we found a beautiful compound of gardens and large houses. It was an evacuee's paradise after a trip of 4 hours. Okay, let's see. Then I have a description of the trip, what I saw. Should I just skip that one?
Just scenery?
What? Should I skip it?
Well, if it's scenery, you can skip it.
All right. This is just describing Medellin. We'll go. Next is, when people travel, they usually pack their best clothes deep into the iron-handled steamer trunks. In go dancing slippers, silk slips, warm coats, beaded purses, rich evening gowns, cotton play suits, and in fact, everything that contributed to, look at me, I'm in style. We evacuated. This was different. See that old copra sack over there? It contains faded blue skirts, worn rubber shoes, Chinese sandals, a cotton slip, old white blouses, and a straw hat. They say values change during war, and I heartily believe it. Next day, December 27th, Manila bombed Santo Domingo, the oldest church in the Philippines. Girls' cottages, schools, convents, and private homes were destroyed. That was the news. Now, we settled down. There are about 26 American families here. Mr. Forbes is the owner of the compound and of the mill. The families with little children settled down in one house, and the rest of us in Mr. Forbes's house. We divided the house. 12 of us sleep on the floor on the wide porch. On one side of the house, we have bath schedules, meal schedules, and bedtime schedules. All right, the next thing, I talk about the garden, but I'll skip that one. December 28th, Sunday, we put all our canned goods in together for the commissary. There are 38 people living in this house. That's a lot of people in one house. That was meant to hold a family of 6, but we are comfortable and very satisfied. I know it will do me good. For the last 3 years, I have been developing a feeling of inferiority whenever I was among Americans, so much so that I used to slip out of their presence or cross the street to avoid meeting them. There's a great indignity among us because of the unjust raids on Manila after Manila had been declared an open city. All right? This is a dream of my mother. I'll skip the dreams. December 29, Monday. Tonight, when everyone was just in bed, the whole house shook from roof to floor. It's a bomb, I said, leaping out of bed. And then I felt a little, I'm going to take a drink of water.
Here, Doug's all set.
Oh, I tell you.
I know you're doing all the talking, and we're just listening.
December 29, Monday. Tonight, when everyone was just in bed, the whole house shook from roof to floor. "It's a bomb," said I, leaping out of bed, and then I felt a little bit ashamed of myself for feeling so jumpy. It was only an earthquake, but the shaking was just like the concussion of a bomb. I wasn't the only one who thought it was a bomb. I may be in a room talking with someone, and then I would jump up and run to a window. Sure enough, there would be the sound of airplanes. This war trains you. It gives you a sixth sense, a sense for detecting the distant hum of planes, although the sound is faint and far away. The war trains you. It makes you alert, helpful, sympathizing, and understanding. So I was trained. Okay? Separated us. Many of us are not so fortunate. Our families are separated. Mother, Catherine, and I often wonder about our dad. My dad, is he still on the plantation? Has he joined the American Army over in Lanao? Mrs. Brown's husband was in Davao when hostilities broke out. She wonders if he had a chance to get out of that hot spot into another province. Mrs. Goebel worries about Charles, who was sent to high school in Baguio 4 months ago. Peggy Ellis is a temporary orphan. Her father and mother are shut up in Manila, in other words, already prisoners. But Peggy knows they are safe. Another in the same predicament is little Marcia Fee, whose parents are with the Ellises. Most of the husbands are separated from their wives during the day. They are doing hush-hush work in Cebu for the Army. We have learned not to worry, but we are a little anxious. There are no means of transportation or communication, and even passes are needed, and letters are censored. Yeah, all letters you send have to be censored before they're mailed. They censor them. I can't get that. December 30. Roosevelt made his speech of aid for the Philippines, but Cebu was bombed again. My friend Peggy and I rode on a bicycle. We raced up and down from the house to the mill and back again. How good it is to be alive.
Maybe first
You want me to-
explain that you moved from the Sugar Central to this camp of
You want me to
huts.
read March 28?
Just the one that said, we just learned that Kason, yes. But explain where you are. Explain about Camp 88. And then
about
read
March
that.
28?
Yeah.
Okay.
But first, tell us about Camp 88, because we don't
Camp
know about
88.
that.
Let's see. This is March 13.
I think you can go right to March 28th, but just say
Shall I
we're
just
now
read- shall I
in
just
Camp
read,
88. Uh-huh.
We're still in Camp 88.
Right, but you haven't told us what Camp 88 is yet. Jane? The 28th is kind of nice because you talk about.
Shall I read that?
Yes, but first say, we're now in Camp 88 in the mountains.
Let's see.
That doesn't have
Okay.
Camp 88 on it.
Huh.
We're not in prison yet. Okay. It's March 28th. I'll read that then. Oh, it's all mixed up. March 28th, Saturday. We learned today that President Quezon is in Australia. He cannot stay on Corregidor because of the cold underground tunnels of this island fortress are not good for his health. Mr. and Mrs. Sanders had lunch with Lieutenant and Mrs. Spotty in our house. Mrs. Sanders told Mother that the floors are as shiny as usual as mirrors. How I wish I were living in Cebu instead of up here where the floors are just bamboo slats and everything you drop falls through the cracks to underneath the house. The uniform of Army officers will be changed from gray khaki the ordinary soldiers to the ordinary soldiers blue denim due to the fact that the Japanese pick off the Army officers by the conspicuously different uniforms they wear. Insignias to be worn under the lapel of the breast packet instead of on the shoulder band. This morning a group of us set out on a cave expedition loaded with baskets, umbrellas, flashlights, straw hats. We were a curious spectacle. We passed banana groves, climbed rocky hills, and climbed up steep slopes, holding on to the roots of twigs for support. The sun shining its hottest and brightest didn't make matters any better. Margie and Catherine, acting as guides, blazed the trail for us, and at length we reached the cave. These caves, though not deep, are lovely, with their shimmering stalactites and with the vines and ferns that clustered at the entrance. Some of us crawled on hands and knees to explore the depths with flashlights. Others, by striking different stalactites, produced different sounds, which made interesting music. Lucy Ann made a collection of molars and incisors, as teeth. Margie carried home a piece of skull. Catherine contented herself with breaking off stalactites, and I pulled off small burry palms to bring home. We reached home with several minor casualties. Mr. Goebel had ripped the toe off his shoe, scratched his back on a thorn bush, and ripped his shirt on a sharp stalactite. Peggy slid down a hill and scratched her knee, while the rest of us were thoroughly exhausted. Mr. Goebel was the object of ridicule at supper table. The men all joked at his torn shoe and called him caveman. Today, Patty Johnson celebrated her 3rd birthday with an Easter party for the little kids. This evening, our mess, that means joined the upper mess, that means the place we ate, for a turkey dinner party. Mr. Paget, Lieutenant Affleck, Captain Creelan, and Colonel Edmonds came up from Cebu just for the event. We had an electric light outside and everyone was dressed in his best. I thought of the saying, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die. I'm reading a wonderful book called Embezzled Heaven by Franz Werner. It's just a book to read at these times and gives one a history, fact, and learned discussion. Leaflets were dropped on Cebu again today, stating that the Japanese were going to burn the city. They won't unless they want a retaliation on Tokyo. Margie Cleland's father gave her the shirt to the army uniform he promised her. March 29, Major Tom Powell, Jack Curtis, and Commander Lade came up for lunch. Major Powell is only 24 years old and a major. Captain Cleland rose from a non-military trained civilian to a captain in 2 weeks. And pro-Americans are getting their rank faster than they can realize them. There's a rumor that Don Bell, former news commentator of Manila, was tortured and killed by the Japanese. They tied him to a stake and then slowly burned him to death by putting out their cigarette lighters on him. We heard that a Japanese cruiser was anchored off of Lilawan, Cebu. The evening, the enemy asked that the Japanese prisoners we have in Cebu be allowed to return to his country, the Japanese prisoner. Next day, March 30, we heard over the U.S. radio that the Americans are concerned regarding the safety of the Philippines. Some of us said, copycats, and another replied, it's about time. When is that dressmaker coming? I heard an impatient voice say, and in a short time, in came Margie, not just Margie, but Private Mouse, we called her. Private Mouse Cleland, as we call her. March 31, a Japanese plane flying at a height of 27,000 feet was shot down by our anti-aircraft guns on Corregidor Island. Mrs. Spotty came up to camp this morning and will stay for 2 days as the guest of Mr. Sanders. Mrs. Spotty came to Cebu from Samar after the outbreak of hostilities. She said, like us, that arriving on Cebu, she found how many useless things she had carried with her, and agreed with us that values do change in war. Mother and I wrote letters to my dad. These will be delivered by carrier, or as Mother says, in safe hands. April 1. In the darkness of the dawn, under someone's bedroom windows, the soft beating of a brass gong, then a voice, Japanese invasion. Japanese invasion. What? Where? Who? What's that? Asked the startled, sleepy voice. For we have disappeared and run to another house where we repeat the same process. Soon the whole camp is aroused and laughing at their predicament. It's an April Fool's joke, that's all. That wasn't very nice. I'm not feeling well tonight. Earlier this morning, some men pursued a small puppy. Catching it, they brought it near where I was standing, and one man jumped with both feet, and the puppy's head, the bones cracked. Eventually, all dogs in Cebu will be destroyed, for there's not a a drop of anti-rabies serum on this island. So they're killing off the dogs. The rising moon was a large orange disk in the horizon. For some minutes we witnessed a partial eclipse. Mr. Johnson made a U.S. and engineer cap insignia out of tin for Margie's uniform. She's this little girl. Today she came around with her lieutenant's bars on, as proud as punch. She wears her uniform and cap every occasion she can. Now she's called Lieutenant Mouse, M-O-U-S-E, Cleveland. She's a little girl. April 2, Thursday. Mr. Goebel came back to camp from Cebu with a letter from his son Charles. The letter dated February 1st, and this is April the 2nd when he got it, was enclosed with Mr. Goebel's mother's letters dated a few weeks later. Charles Goebel wrote that he was in Camp John Hay concentration camp in Baguio with other Americans. He said the food was good, but that there was not enough of it. Could it be possible, he wrote to his grandmother, to send a few canned goods up here to me? Mrs. Goebel's mother is a neutral. She's Swiss and is living in Manila. How she got a letter from Baguio to Manila is a wonder. Her letter said she was not in a concentration camp, for she was a neutral. During the greatest bombing of Manila, she did not take shelter. This bombardment of the Philippines capital, Manila, lasted from 11 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. During the occupation of Manila, Mrs. Goebel's mother remained in her store. She was brave. Food and money are scarce in March in Manila. Food and money is scarce in Manila. Banks are closed, and an epidemic of dysentery has swept through the American concentration camp because of lack of facilities for the 4,000 people interned. Chickens cost from 2 pesos and 50 centavos to 5 pesos each, and a head of cabbage is worth 2 pesos and 50 centavos. The Red Cross credits have been frozen, and the organization has only enough money to last until the middle of April. One old man who came to Cebu from Manila in a banca, that's a native boat, said he saw he saw Mrs. McDonald and her 3 children, Americans with Filipino citizenship, standing in the bread line to hear of the suffering of one's friends is almost breaks one's heart. America has lost all of her flying fortresses, which were in the Philippines. We agreed on that point at supper tonight. Mr. Sanders then told us a story he had heard in Cebu. When General MacArthur made his trip from Bataan to Australia, he stayed a week at Del Monte, Mindanao, to wait for the flying fortresses to arrive, which were to escort him to Australia. 4 of the flying fortresses, or the flying ships, started out for Del Monte. 1 crashed in Australia. A second one turned back due to engine trouble. A third crashed in Iligan Bay, and the sole remaining ship landed at her destination with a disabled engine and was not fit to take the trip to Australia. A new formation of flying fortresses then had to be sent out again. Mr. Sanders said the inefficiency of the flying fortresses in the East is not due to the ship itself, but to the inexperienced and untrained who pilot them. It's a ship, but it means a plane. 2 smaller American torpedo boats are anchored off Cebu this morning. But last night, Cebu City was on the alert, for although the ships had been sighted, they were unidentified. Colonel Edmonds sent the letters Mother and I had written to my dad by plane to Mindanao yesterday. Someone said there is much mail somewhere for the Philippines. Won't it be strange to receive a letter in April dated December of last year? There's a whole bodega full of local mail. At first they stuffed letters and packages in kerosene cans before censoring them. The censoring September was so slow, but now no mail is delivered except on rare occasions. One American received a Christmas package from the States in March. Pretty good mail service. Our Christmas meal probably went down on the SS Corregidor. President Quezon left for Australia from Dumaguete. The ship had to wait an hour before he could assemble his party. This included his wife, 3 children, his doctor, his priest, his valet, his 2 burly bodyguards, Vice President Osmeña, and someone jokingly said his French maid. Mother and I climbed the hill back of the house. The view is splendid. Towards the north were valleys and mountains below us, and then the sea on the horizon, and deeper into the horizon, the island of Leyte.
Before I gave it to...
All right, April 9. Catherine, this is my sister's birthday. Catherine was wakened this morning by 14 birthday whippings, duly administered by Mary Lou, while I was chasing the turkeys off to find their early morning bugs. I saw everyone climbing trees and heard the cry, "Foolish dog!" Immediately I scrambled up Peggy's stairs and into her house, hugging a turkey. "Mad dog!" I shouted, and slid the door back. The dog ran past, and I continued to drive the turkeys in. Turkeys on. It was a surprise to see Mr. McAdam at breakfast this morning. He got in at 10 o'clock last night. Blackouts are not strictly enforced, and cars can drive with their headlights on. Mr. McAdam said that cruisers and transports are lurking around Cebu. The fast plane we saw last night was an evening patrol plane scouting for the enemy. Colonel Cook went to Iloilo yesterday on an important mission. We had a surprise birthday party for Catherine at Mary Lou's house. Lucy Ann, Catherine, Peggy, Mary Lou, Margie, and I played Monopoly all afternoon until 6:30 o'clock. Then we set the tables using a sheet as a cloth. The food was good: fudge panucci, sardine sandwiches, sausage sandwiches, pickles, baked beans, cake, and a shirt. For presents, Catherine received a play suit for Mary Lou, compact from Margie, dress material from Peggy, comb from Mother, clips and candy from Mrs. Ireland, clips from Mrs. Sanders, perfume and powder from Mrs. Heine. It was a lovely day for us in camp, but I have been depressed all day since I heard of Cebu's air raid today. At 7 o'clock, a most surprising hour of the day, Japanese planes flew into Cebu. Their object was not to bomb military positions. Theirs was to strike terror into the hearts of Filipinos. Swooping over the city, the enemy machine gun. The unexpected populace was aroused and startled. Today, for the first time, the city has suffered many casualties. 2 men were killed on the launch between Opuan and Cebu. 3 Americans on a mosquito boat lost their lives. But this was not all. Again, Cebu was raided. A short time later, I do not know all the details or casualties. Then, at 7:30 this evening, we listened to the voice of freedom. Bataan is fallen, said the announcer. How our hearts sank at the news. Some of us left the mess hall in tears. Without listening to the rest of the broadcast, the men put their heads in their hands, and the Filipinos spread the news throughout the barrio. Bataan is fallen, and then everyone began talking. It is only a matter of days until... Okay.
I think that's it.
Matter of days.
Okay.
You want me to read it?
Uh-huh.
When I first saw the commander, he was standing before the door of our mess hall. When he had thrown down his duffel bag, and he stood resting with one hand upon the butt of his revolver, the other upon the leaning trunk of a coconut tree. The commander was a well-built man, dressed in his USAFI uniform. USAFI means United States Army in the Far East. His white hair sharply set off his bronze face. His deep blue eyes were grave, his features clear cut. The lines which furrowed his broad forehead showed traces of anxiety and care. The tarnished gold star on his collar and the band around his sleeve was the only sign of his rank. The collar and cuffs of his khaki uniform were frayed, his shoes were dusty, and his cartridge belt sagged with the weight of his canteen and binoculars. And now that the enemy had invaded Cebu, he had felt it his duty as Provost Marshal of Bogo, that's where we evacuated, to care for the Americans in his district. The commander had visited Camp 88 before, but now he'd come to stay, leaving his men behind on their own and ordering the sergeant of his company, who had guarded our camp, to bury their guns and retire to the hills, since it was impossible to join the main forces. This the sergeant had done, and the commander now took over alone. Camp 88 had been built by Americans who had evacuated the city, and with its 14 squat nipa huts, its 2 mess halls, and its little wooden storehouses had sprung up overnight. The camp lay in a valley among the hills of northern Cebu, about 2 kilometers from the main road. Although the site had been chosen more for its convenience than for its beauty, the spot was lovely. The green mountains in the distance, the hillsides of corn, the sulfur springs, one of which bubbled from between the forked roots of a large tree at the mess hall door, and the brilliant sunsets. All these were part of Camp 88. In this peaceful environment, 30 people lived for almost 3 months. Then the invaders landed on the shore, and all was confusion. That's when we evacuated. As the days went by, we learned to love the commander. When upon the fall of Bataan and the invasion of Cebu, we were frightened, he had calmed us, not by keeping us in ignorance of facts, but by telling us what he knew of the Phil-American plans and the treatment we might expect from the enemy. In his calm, collected way, he explained that he would act as mediator for at the end that we personally had nothing to fear from the enemy. You will not see a Japanese for at least 3 months, he said. Out of the caves and back over the hills came our boxes, trunks, typewriters, and life flowed on as peaceful as below. One day, the commander took us children with him on one of his daily walks. We walked in single file, Margie in her USAPI uniform with her cap at a jaunty angle, and we others panting and puffing as we tried to keep up with the commander's long strides. We passed through coconut groves, waded across rivers, followed paths through our fields, some cane fields, and finally climbed over a high hill, at the summit of which we paused. As we stood at the edge of the steep cliff, far down below us the high waves of a blue sea just dashed against the rocks. Across the strait lay a long island, clearly outlined against the gray horizon. The commander, fitting his binoculars to his eyes, looked in the direction of the island. That is Leyte, where Major Hart went 3 weeks ago, I remarked. Major Hurst. The commander nodded his head. A lot of the boys are there. They hope to get back into service again. It's a lot better than sitting in a military prison. When we returned, the commander's men were waiting to see him. The tall, straight youths were surrounded him with grim. I'll let you on your own, the commander said. You may surrender if you wish. When they had gone on, the commander shook his head. If I were young and well and strong, I should never turn myself in. The view from Philip's porch, we were on Camp 88, was lovely that night. Across the valley, the burning cane fields lighted up the hillside with rose, which glowed red when a breeze started up. The group who sat on the porch were silent, but for a brief remark now and then. I say, Commander, said Brownie, what are your plans? Will you be leading us? I haven't decided yet, replied the commander. A group of Filipinos came to camp this morning with the offer to take me to Leyte for a small sum, but it might jeopardize your position if I left. Jeopardize our position, explained Daisy as she started up from her chair. And he hasn't decided yet? Added Phillips. Commander, do you mean to say you wouldn't consider giving yourself up? By doing so, you would endanger us? You can't go off to Leyte. You mustn't, put in Dora. If you ever considered doing that, why did you ever come here at all? Everyone began talking at once, their voices rising to a high pitch. Mrs. Judge, tall, poised and ruffled, rose and said, "Commander, shall we have that cup of coffee?" After the commander and Mrs. Judge had left, the ladies really went to work. A committee composed of their husbands were appointed to visit the commander that night and demand that he give himself up. See, we're hiding out and we have this commander with us. At midnight, the men returned and Camp 88 once more slumbered. The next morning, the commander failed to appear at breakfast. Daisy turned to Mrs. Judge with a frightened look. "He's gone. What'd I tell you? He's gone and left us." "Listen," said Mrs. Judge. "He's not the kind of man who would go off without first telling us." And she added gently, "You know he'll do what he believes is best for us all." Okay. The commander, however, returned late that evening, weary and disheveled. At dinner, the tension was broken when Daisy, in a sweet tone of voice, raised her eyebrows and said, "Well, did you enjoy your walk?" "I discovered something that might interest you," said the commander. "I had lunch with a Spaniard today," continued the commander, "and he served me green jackfruit seed. They're good. Try them sometime." "Really?" said Daisy.
A little
"Maybe I
louder.
will." It was April 29. All officers were to turn themselves in before the 30th or be shot on sight. That night, I dreamed of the commander. I saw him walking down a lonely beach at dawn beneath the trees which overhang the shore. The cool gray darkness of early morn hung over the trees, the sea and the shore, but far away the sea along the horizon glowed light, and a small banca appeared from the direction of the light and pulled into shore. The rowers beckoned to the commander. For a long time he stood motionless, deep in thought. Then he slowly shook his head and reluctantly turned his face away from the distant light into the clutching darkness. It seemed to reach out and drag him into its depths. And then I saw a prison cell, this is a dream, whose iron bars hemmed in a group of sad-faced men dressed in khaki. I saw those who sat on their bare cots, others who stood looking mournfully through the bars, others who paced up and down, among them who stood in a group talking in mummed voices. I saw a man whose white hair sharply set off his bronze features. That was my dream. Next morning, stumbling over a demijohn, that's a container for water, which stood at the door of the mess hall in Camp 88, the commander entered the room. Perspiration soaked his shirt and rolled up over his face from packing, he said, but it was more than that. His hands trembled and his face grew pale as he picked up his bag. Many left the mess hall as he prepared to go. A few stayed to say goodbye, leaving behind everything except a change of clothes and his blue sidearms. The commander wearily walked and disappeared from the sight around the bend of the trail. I say, "I just couldn't say goodbye to him," remarked Daisy, her head bent over a piece of embroidery. After what he said, he hadn't decided when by escaping he might jeopardize our position, but now he's showing himself well in mediating for our stay. I think I'll have my husband build a sun porch on this side of the house. 24 hours later, our caravan of cars, escorted by Japanese soldiers, drove to the military headquarters. As we drew up among the group of American soldiers fenced in a small space in front of the building, the commander sat on a hard cot, his head in his hands, staring into space. Roused by loud Oriental voices and the sudden sound of hobnailed boots running across pavement, he raised his head and saw us. For a moment he gazed, unbelieving. Then a look of despair paused over his head, over his face, and his white head dropped back into his hands. I remember that. He thought that if he didn't turn himself in, that the Japanese would be angry. But he said that he was going to help, ask that we stay where we were, but that was not the case.
So it was for naught.
It's just a story.
And did you ever know what happened to
story
him?
after story. What?
Did you ever learn what happened to him?
Yeah, he died. He didn't survive. I think he died on a hill ship. Commander Charles Lade. Not many survived.
And so, Anne, you could ask her.
Ask her some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Okay. Mom, now I know this was the suitcase that you said your grandmother gave you, grandmother Doner, your grandmother Doner from Lancaster, and that you mentioned what did you say
There's
here?
a lining there, see?
Uh-huh.
See the
But
lining?
this has been covered since then. This is not the lining, right?
No, there's a
Right.
lining here.
And what did you do about that lining? What did you hide back
It wore
there?
out, just poured it out, pulled it out.
Uh-huh.
It's no good.
But what did you put behind the lining when you were in
Same
the
thing.
prison camp?
Diary notes from December 41 to December 42. Glued behind the cloth. And then I never opened it up until later. See?
So it says what, diary notes from December 1941 to December 1942 were glued behind
Right.
the then cloth lining of this suitcase
Wilfred?
by a fellow prisoner, a
Mhm.
Norwegian sailor, Wilfred Willie, before we were taken
Taken
to Manila on
With
a
that
journey.
transport. December
True.
1942, yes. I put my notes in there.
In your diary,
Uh-huh.
right. But
And
somebody
then all
else said,
It also had a pocket you could put things in like this.
oh,
But we pulled
okay.
that whole thing out.
Now, I was looking through some things, Mom, and I came across this, which you probably had
I
hidden
didn't.
back there,
Not really.
or in your suitcase. Is this when the Canadian
Red Cross.
Red Cross came to bring you something here? It says chocolate. It must
Yeah,
have been
that's
what?
something else.
Chocolate bar.
Mhm.
And also, this was interesting. You have my favorite menus, and it says Mrs. Gibb, our family. But you have,
I didn't have that there. No.
you didn't?
No.
Okay, where did this come from? I know you talked a
This
lot
came from
about,
the junior college building.
yes,
See?
right.
The Club Filipino,
Mhm.
Cebu City.
Was this before the war?
No, during the war.
Okay, during the war,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
But didn't you talk a lot
And
about?
what they had to eat. We're so hungry.
Yeah. In fact, you even have a
Food we
recipe
wanted to
book
Right.
of recipes
Mhm.
from
So recipes,
families,
right. Mhm.
and
Yeah.
because all they thought about, I guess, was food. And then, let's see, there was also, yeah, this was interesting. I found this, Mom. It says labels saved in Santo Tomas Internment Camp.
Uh-huh,
Are these the type of labels you would write behind?
yep. Labels.
So labels, what type? Just, this is from,
Toothpaste powder. Yep.
and didn't you also write on, what, Japanese, cigarette, papers,
Mhm.
the back of them?
Right.
Let me see here what this was. I looked. Well, let's see. Oh, this was,
That came from Fair Book. I said Watts Hall, but that was because I saved it, but I just put that so that no one would take it.
okay.
See?
What did it say here?
Mhm.
Is that something that you found
Yep.
when you were in the, were you in a prison
See,
camp?
copyright 1917. What's that?
Was at the Junior College, University of the Philippines. Were you interned there also or not?
At the junior college? Yes.
Okay, so you might have found some
I
of
found
these.
lots of things, yes.
Uh-huh.
And the letter that my dad wrote
Oh, really? Uh-huh.
before he got returned.
Okay. And there was something else that looked quite interesting. I want to put this back in here to keep it together.
Here.
But I was looking,
You want to put this back there?
okay.
That could get ruined.
Here. Open this up. There was, I think, let me see. There were some interesting things in here, Mom. Look at this.
Or radio show.
Here is something about distribution of comfort kits. Comfort kits.
Oh, yes.
What is that all
What's
about?
that?
Distribution of comfort kits.
That's right. January 3rd, between 10 o'clock. Uh-huh. Yep. Independence Day, 1943. It's earlier than a newspaper. Flag of the Philippines. Look.
Okay.
Show it to us.
Okay,
There's
yeah.
the flag of the Philippines.
Look at that. And that says 1943. Let's see, it says flag of the Philippines to be displayed on Independence Day, 1943,
Okay.
inserted in newspaper.
Now, this is going to be, I don't want this.
I know, so let's fold it back up, put it in there. Here, you want to put this in between?
What's that?
So if you want to ask her, right,
Yeah.
about what's in there?
Okay, Mom, can you tell me what's in here? This is kind of interesting. Well, first of all, looks like, well, you have some Japanese currency here. What would that be from?
The Japanese
Uh-huh.
government, yes.
Right. How did you get
You notice that I put them all in.
sleeves? Uh-huh.
I
But I
put
was
them all
wondering how
here.
you got
Now, this one is very, very, very rare.
Uh-huh.
The Philippine National Bank,
Mhm.
1 peso. I don't know how much these are worth.
How were these preserved? I mean, where were these?
I did that.
I know, but where were these? Where did you get these? Did you?
This is Cebu Currency Committee. Yep.
Did you get these after the war?
No, during the
And then-
war.
Okay.
During the war.
But tell me about this. Is this one of the plays that you had, that you did in the camp?
Yes, I think so.
And it was interesting. I was
Right.
reading
That's
where it
Jane.
said, it said here, the cat. Oh, let's see. Oh gosh, it mentioned you, Mom. Well, I don't know if I can find that now. That was kind of interesting where it
Right.
said, talked about the cast itself as international in character, from the far-flung corners of America, England, Australia, Scotland, Ireland, and Portugal. But, oh, that's right. When I was looking at it, it mentioned you coming in, probably to the camp. The second page was interesting. Let's see. It says, 5 months before the grand finale of this play that was done, I guess, in Santo Tomas, Mom, during the war. 5 months before the grand finale, 2 famous stars of the Philippines, Peggy Ellis and Jane Doner, arrived from Cebu. And 3 months later, Henry, is it Puffett or Puffet?
Yeah, Mary Parfit.
Okay. Henry, it says, a Baguio dashed on the scene just in time to complete the cast for the final curtain call.
Yeah, this is a,
What
we're
is
giving a
that?
history of the class of 43. What was
Oh.
the class given?
Oh, history
Okay.
of. Oh, and I guess it's a stage. Ladies and gentlemen, on the stage tonight, we have a
Now
cast.
we come to 21 actors differing in character and nationality and background, joined together by Oriental upheaval. See?
This is the class. This is the
Class
Okay.
of 43.
class. Okay.
Jane, did you have to
Yeah.
have your plays approved before you could put them on?
Our what?
Did you have to go to the head of the camp and say, we're going to put on a play and here is the script?
Yeah, we
Did
would.
you have to get permission
Oh, yes,
from the Japanese?
I don't think so. Just,
I'm not sure. Okay.
we had guards all the time. Because they didn't speak English.
Now, I thought this was interesting. I know your sister was is very artistic, and it looks like she drew a picture of someone.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine
Right.
Doner is your